Hello everyone and welcome to this very special live event here broadcast from the Attenborough Arts Centre at the University of Leicester. So we're here to talk about being human in digital environments. This is part of the Being Human Festival. So we're here to celebrate looking back at everything that we've learned over COVID, adapting to creating online spaces for engagement and interaction. My name's Marie Nugent. I'm here as Public Engagement Manager for the University of Leicester. And we know there are so many benefits to providing online spaces for engagement. Over COVID, we had to adapt massively to provide that vital interaction to so many people who would otherwise be isolated. So we know that online spaces can be vital to bringing people together, but what can we now reflect on and take forward as we drive forward this sort of way in which we bring people together? It's really exciting, and I think we're going to learn a lot as we go through 3 particular projects that we've been able to be part of in the last year and a half. So the first project we're going to look at is the Inclusive Youth Arts Programme. So this is a really special project funded by BBC Children in Need, and it's something that the Learning and Outreach team here at the University of Leicester have been working really hard over the last 6 years to develop. Obviously, 18 months or so ago, with the impact of COVID, a lot of the ways in which they were interacting with children and young families had to drastically change. And this is now a video describing the Inclusive Youth Arts Programme, as well as how they were able to adapt to create some really special ways in which they could interact with children and families online.
Attenborough Arts Centre's Inclusive Youth Arts Programme has been generously funded by BBC Children in Need for 6 wonderful years. This short film looks back and celebrates some of the magical moments we've shared together. Our programme provides much needed opportunities for children and young people with complex needs and disabilities to be creative, to feel great about themselves and to enjoy being with others. Specifically taking place at weekends and during school holidays, we provide workshops, performances and events here at the Attenborough Arts Centre and at community venues and SEN schools. At the heart of much of our work is our state-of-the-art Inclusive Arts Centre. From its Changing Places facility, accessible theatre and galleries, to our trained and friendly staff, the centre has created a vital, trusted and safe space for our children and their families. Our programme has always been child-centred, tailored to individual needs of children aged 0 to 18. What this means in practice is we aim to understand individual needs and get to know all of our families, and this informs our activities and shapes what we do. This was Attenborough's first major outreach programme and has enabled us to learn and grow with our community so much over the last 6 years. There have been so many benefits to the children, such as supporting children to access our mainstream events, festivals and theatre performances, safe in the knowledge their needs have been considered. We have also supported young people to transition to our integrated young people's group, the Next Gen Creatives, providing a safe space for young people who have grown out of the programme. Recently, we have developed more artist residencies, commissioning specialist artist practitioners to deliver workshops over several weeks and months, which has built trust and strengthened relationships, creating a sense of community and belonging. We have seen that this way of working has enabled more young people to feel confident, more engaged and happy. We have programmed a wide range of art forms, including dance, music, visual art and performance. In the last 6 years, we have worked with over 200 children, 86 in the last 2 years. We have worked with 33 individual theatre companies, 30 artists, and 22 children and young people have achieved a nationally recognised arts award. In the last 3 years alone, we have delivered 28 performances, 83 workshop sessions, 7 individual social events, taken part and curated 3 exhibitions of children's artwork, supported 2 young people to transition to the Next Gen Creatives and held 5 annual sensory garden parties. In March 2020, everything changed. We knew that our families were even more isolated, losing support, shielding and not being able to go to school. It became a priority for us to stay connected and to support them. But there wasn't a blueprint for developing digital online activities. We had to be innovative, take risks, all whilst ensuring it was inclusive, to develop a whole new pedagogy for digital activities. We learned that families with disabled children need far more support to access online activity than just clicking a link. From settle time to physical tactile materials to integrated Makaton and BSL, but also artists who are highly skilled and can tailor the activities to individual needs. We collaborated with artists to develop a series of video call workshops with bespoke and tactile materials sent to families in advance, designed to bring creativity and fun into children's homes, involving the whole family, creating a truly collaborative and fun experience at home. We had inclusive dance, wheelchair dance, sensory stories, visual art and play, music and rhythm, and sessions specially designed for teenagers. We knew our digital offer wasn't quite right for everyone, and to reach these families, we commissioned artist Sian Watson-Taylor to design sensory and tactile art packs to be posted to families at home. Inspired by our exhibitions in our gallery, each pack has the opportunity to gain an arts award, with prompts and exciting and unusual materials to explore at home.
So I had the lovely opportunity of working with families with children with complex needs and their siblings and their parents here at Attenborough, exploring materials, getting inspired by the exhibition and having that wonderful feeling of what it's like working in a gallery and being led by the children. In a time when COVID kind of took away your power, made you feel like you didn't have any choices. Things change all the time. This is constant. Creativity, the joy of making is always there.
None of the work developed over lockdown would have been possible without the extensive conversations and consultations we had with our families and the trust that we have built with them over the years. It's so great to finally be back face to face, to be reconnecting, and what better way to do that than with our sensory garden party. And you can see straight away on our families' faces, on the children's faces, that they share that feeling. It's just such a relief to be back together.
So today's just been such a lovely day to actually get out and see people for real again in person. It's been a really long, difficult time in lockdown, particularly with a child with special needs who hasn't understood why we haven't been able to do all of our normal things that she would normally participate in. Bella's really social and she likes to be out and about meeting people. The Zoom sessions that we took part in at the beginning of lockdown when school was closed were fantastic because they enabled her to engage with activities that we wouldn't be able to do at home, and she found it really exciting to do that kind of thing because it was all new to her. So they were brilliant. We did a few different things, dancing, some creative and some music workshops, which was super. But obviously as lockdown's gone on, she's really missed actually interacting with people, as we all have. So today's a perfect day, sun's shining, some of her friends are here, and it's just lovely to see people for real.
This is what we do, and the reason we do it is because every child has a right to be an artist, to practice, to be creative, to access culture and to work and collaborate with brilliant artists. We're really passionate about that at Attenborough, and there are so many barriers that people experience in their everyday lives, particularly children with complex needs and disabilities. So we set this project up to sort of remove some of those barriers and to find new ways of doing things and to experiment and to push boundaries and to be ambitious for our children and young people. And we've been doing this work for 6 years now, generously supported by BBC Children in Need, and it wouldn't have been possible without their funding. And we've done some incredible things, and the Sensory Garden Party has been an absolute joy to be part of and to see evolve over the years.
I feel truly privileged to have been part of this journey, and I feel so passionate. As a team, we feel so passionate about removing barriers to accessing the arts, and I think this year has made it even more important, shown us just the importance of staying connected, and coming back together and seeing people again has been really emotional. And none of this would have been possible without the generous support and funding from BBC Children in Need. Looking to the future, it's obvious from seeing our families again that there's huge relief that we're back face to face, But we also know that the blended approach to accessing activities is still needed. And what I mean by that is having opportunities to access workshops online, through video call workshops, through digital resources, through postal packs, that is still needed. And we're going to continue to look at how we can implement that into the mainstream programme.
I'm a grandparent of a child who's been here today. I think for all of us, the lockdown's been tough. For children with special needs and their parents, I'm a grandparent, it's been particularly challenging. And to be back together with Hannah and the team, it's such an inclusive, happy environment. They can't do enough to make the children welcome. Elijah has just loved it. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everybody. It really is a vitally important programme. It makes such a difference. So thank you very much.
That was a video summarising the Inclusive Youth Arts Programme that's funded by BBC Children in Need, and it's something that, as I say, the team has been developing for 6 years through the Attenborough Arts Centre's Learning and Outreach team. It's a really wonderful example of the ways in which teams whose focus is to engage with people who need that additional extra support in accessing activities, all the extra hard work that went into adapting those online activities for those families, and importantly, how vital those opportunities to interact were over COVID, as otherwise these were people who were at even greater risk of isolation. So a really wonderful example and some really great things we can learn, I think, from that. Particularly this idea of a blended approach to learning, and something that one of the team there said about, you know, it's not really always for everyone and we need to be mindful of that. So we'll come back to that, I think, later in our panel discussion. The next thing I want to share with you is a bit of a conversation, really, or a pre-recorded talk actually, from an artist who took part in a new scheme that I'm helping develop here through Attenborough Arts Centre, using some Wellcome Trust funding. So this is a scheme that we're calling the Creative Engagement Fellowships. We ran a pilot from August 2020 over the course of this year, and we were really amazed to see the appetite for new ways of thinking and learning and collaborating between researchers and artists. So Angela is the first person who we funded to be a Creative Engagement Fellow, and she's going to talk for, again, about 10 minutes about how, first of all, she got into this opportunity to be funded to be an engagement fellow, to work with Professor John Maltby, who's a professor in psychology. She's also going to talk about the work that she does in general as her artistic practice and facilitation, the work that she's interested in, but also how, by working with John and because of COVID, sort of changing the way in which we think about engagement, that really provided a great opportunity for her to adapt her ways of thinking and working, and the special considerations that she then made to create an online space where we could really connect with each other.
Hi, I'm Angela Clerkin. My company is Clerkin Works, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be here at the Being Human event. Well, actually, I'm on holiday, so I've pre-recorded this, but I'm looking forward to seeing the recordings of everybody else's work. I'm a theatre maker, a writer, a performer, and mostly I'm a facilitator, and that's most of the work that I'm doing at the moment. In my company, I do lots of different things. I'm going to tell you very little bit about a project that I worked on just before I became one of the first creative engagement fellows that was part of the Attenborough Arts Centre scheme. So I worked on a project called Through the Door. It's a series of workshops. I run courses. I was running them at the Globe Theatre prior to lockdown. And it's for theatre makers, women and non-binary theatre makers, and directors, designers, writers, etc. And we would use improvisation and devising techniques. And a big part of the work that we were doing, and why it was called Through the Door, was helping each other through the door and creating a supportive community, as well as learning lots of skills. I moved that online when lockdown happened, and I had the opportunity to work with people that I already knew, but to really try and explore how I could use the methodology that I've been building up to work online and to really try and reach through the screen and connect with each other on quite a deep level. So that was really fortunate because it meant that I was able to do some of that work. But when I started working at the University of Leicester, it was a completely different kettle of fish, because I was working with young people who I didn't know, who didn't know me, and who weren't necessarily from a theatre making background. So I'll tell you a little bit about how I started and how the project happened. I applied for this creative engagement fellowship, and it was about identity. That's the theme. And I was paired with an academic who was the fantastic Professor John Maltby. I must say that the person who was facilitating us and our work was Dr. Marie Nugent, and we met, the three of us met and talked about how I might be able to find a creative way of working using John's personal constructs exercises, which were looking at identity and how people play different roles and how they might identify themselves, and how I might use that as a springboard then for creative writing exercises. I then did a little bit of work with Marie to think about who we wanted to attract and how best to do that. And I was very keen that I would continue my work with women and non-binary people, and that we would really try and attract people from the global majority, LGBTQ plus community, working class people, and disabled people, and obviously all the intersections. And I wanted to do that because I really wanted to try and find people who would most benefit from the work, but who would also, who are often marginalised and who don't always sign up for things, partly because they often feel marginalised. So we did some work around that and how best to attract, both in the way, the language we use, the images we use, and who we spoke to. And fantastically, we got two really amazing groups that I worked with on Monday mornings for 3 hours and a different group on Tuesday morning for 3 hours. And we did that for 5 weeks in a row. At the end, we did a presentation and I created a booklet of their work. I'll talk a little bit about that. So just to tell you a little bit about the work that I did and how I made sure, or I really tried with all my heart to reach through the screen to really try and connect. How do we create a joint atmosphere when we are in our little boxes, in our little screens, whether they're Teams or Zoom? How do we find a way to really connect on that human level? So some of the things that I have found to have worked and that I now have as a part of my staple work is doing Tai Chi together. So that's 5 minutes of breathing deeply. I'll do that now so I slow down a bit. Breathing deeply and moving together. It also meant we were communicating or sharing something without speaking for 5 minutes at least in each of our sessions. I also would ask people to check in with how they were feeling and to share that. And the way that I would do that would be various. At the beginning, I might just say, tell us something unusual about yourself and say 2 words that describe an emotion that you're feeling right now. As the time went on, the sharing was a little bit deeper. I always set a really clear time limit on things so that people didn't feel that they had to say loads, but they also could choose not to say anything at all. We also sometimes drew how we felt and would hold up the images to the screen, and then people could either share a little bit more about how they were feeling, or they could just let the image speak for themselves. I did this so that people would check in with how they were, but also notice what was going on for other people in the space, in the joint space. One of the things that I work on a lot, and my background is in improvisation, and one of the reasons I really used some of the improvisation techniques before we would write was because there's something about being in the present and not knowing. I wanted to create a brave space, a brave and respectful space. I used those words rather than safe space because we don't know what's going to happen, and we don't know what is safe for one person is not safe for another people. What we can do is to check in with each other and to really look out for each other, and mostly look out for ourselves, particularly as we're working on autobiographical material some of the time. Some of it was fantasy and fiction, and some of it was autobiographical. I'd be really clear when we're working on anything autobiographical. I would encourage people to check in with not sharing anything that they didn't feel safe or okay about sharing with other people who were there. If they felt that they had done, I said that they were really welcome to either email me and that I could then speak to the group, or that they could speak to the group themselves. That actually never happened, partly I think because I set up the possibility, and therefore people did really look after themselves and each other. I was really clear this wasn't therapy, that we were here to do creative writing exercises and to explore identity, and that they had a choice of not to do specific exercises or which exercises that they would want to do. I would also always give lots of options. I think choice is one of the biggest thing, and it really helps people become confident and resilient, and also watch each other, how they handle things. A little bit about the things that I did in the workshops, which was we had lots of discussions. So we would discuss anger, for example. We would explore that as a topic, and then I would set up some writing exercises, and then people were encouraged to share, but nobody had to share. And we would do that, and we would take some breaks, and we would do that over one whole session, might be on that subject. So an interesting thing happened halfway through the workshops. I had a meeting with John and Marie to update where we were, and I was sort of exploring and sort of saying how the workshops were going, and what I was noticing, that in some ways people were it was like almost like a consciousness raising group at times. And John then made an observation that he felt, rather than the end searching for how he might try and find data from the work that we were creating with the written exercises, he felt that actually what was probably more in tune with the work that was actually happening, he noticed that there was actually really deep engagement, and he felt that this was something for the future that we could explore further, of how do we get deep engagement when we are trying to discuss topics or trying to find out what the public really believes or feels about a certain thing. We also really noticed that what was happening was that there was a really well-being feeling around the group, because we were creating this community and these shared ways of communicating with each other, and talking on quite a deep level, but also in a very it felt very safe and warm in the way that people were sharing and exploring where they were, how they felt about their identities. I'm going to draw to a close quite soon. You can tell I'm very passionate about the work that I do. I just want to tell one little thing. Was we then, and then once I knew that was more the emphasis, I relaxed a little bit more, because I sort of understood that the work that we were doing was the work that we were doing, if that makes sense. We talked about consent, and in a way that was a really helpful way to talk about how people might want to think about data, and how they express themselves and how they identify in terms of their identities. At the end, I made a booklet, and I asked all of them which pieces that they were okay with me including. I suggested which ones I wanted to. All of them were anonymous. I did that so that people could decide really clearly what they felt was okay to share, if their name was on the booklet as they were part of the workshops, but not who wrote what. It's a fantastic booklet. I'm so proud of it, partly because the work that was written during this time was absolutely beautiful, and it really touched me. So my last closing gambit is me to say that I think we will be working remotely as time goes on, and for me that's a gift. I think that we will continue working remotely as well as in person. It means that a lot more people are able to engage. There are some people who stop engaging in person. Sorry, I'm just because I'm really aware of the time. So as I close, I'm excited about the possibility, and I'm now offering this work. The project was called This Is Me. I don't think I mentioned that before. So This Is Me as a whole project, as a work about identity and a creative well-being offering, is now possible to work online. And I think for me, I'm really pleased that I have found what I think is the best home for it, which is an online place. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
So that was Angela Clerkin, who, as I said, was our very first Creative Engagement Fellow. I love the way that Angela talks about her work, because she's really conscious of the ways in which she makes people feel comfortable, and wants to build that real connection and understanding between the people that she works with. We're now going to hear from Dr. Lauren Vargas. She is working with Sophie and Ross, who I'm here with now, who we'll come to in just a moment. But Lauren is going to introduce to us a project called One by One, and some of the main ways in which they're considering building these inclusive, accessible online spaces. So over to you, Lauren.
Hello, I'm glad to be here. My name is Dr. Lauren Vargas, and I'm a digital strategist, online community architect, and independent researcher who spent the majority of my 20-year career working with highly regulated organizations. I've been affiliated with the University of Leicester since 2014, where I completed my doctoral studies, and with the One by One project led by the University of Leicester School of Museum Studies since 2018. In 2020, when we embarked on our second wave or project of One by One, we began working with 4 of the Smithsonian units and our UK partners. We had to pivot like everyone else because of the pandemic. And our active research really focused on organizational collaboration and the activities that we needed to create healthy communication and collaboration. Things like how to work out loud or to showcase work in progress in a digital first environment like Slack or Basecamp, as well as digitally augmented spaces like Zoom or Teams, like we're here today. We also spent time helping our research partners assess their digital maturity through conversation using the Digital Culture Compass that was commissioned by the Arts Council England, the development of which included the One by One team. Now, whether it was working with our Smithsonian units or any of our UK partners, we discussed the importance of understanding our own workforce dynamics and internal communities, and what it means to hold psychologically safe spaces internally, and the skills required as a prerequisite to holding safe spaces and inclusive experiences for the communities that we serve. I think it's important before we even discuss what psychological safety means, I think it's important that we define what community means. I really like how the authors of Building Brand Communities, Carrie Melissa Jones and Charles Vogel, how they define community. They say a community exists as a network of relationships made up of participant pairs, feeling trust and appreciation between them. Each relationship is like a point in our bigger view of community. Visitors participate, but participation alone doesn't make them members. Visitors may even visit a community several times, but membership results when somebody crosses a boundary into the community. Now, in real communities, not all participants are members, but all members are participants. Participants show up, they engage, and they return because there are 3 conditions that are there for every type of engagement, activity, or invitation. The first is that of choice. They're able to say yes or no to membership or participation. The second is they have the ability themselves to create meaningful connection with others. And finally, they are able to progress and achieve an individual as well as a collective purpose. Now, what is important here is that it's all about interactions. Community transcends transactions, and this is key. The ability to support any colleague, workplace colleague, or community member on their own journey at their own pace, building common ground to achieve what is needed for the right person at the right time and the right place. Now, what is the role of arts, heritage, and culture to cultivate these inclusive spaces from the inside out and the outside in? This is the challenge that's put forth to practitioners and scholars alike. The past almost 2 years have surfaced many tensions that we must now reckon with. Sometimes when we strive to achieve ambiguous common purpose, people feel pressure to assimilate, and the diversity of identity, perspective, and talent is lost. How might we achieve inclusion? How might we hold a safe space? Well, over the course of our scholarship through the 1x1 project, we found that inclusive community begins with several different conditions, the first of which is commitment. We recognize that this type of trust and sense of belonging takes time and must be cultivated in all spaces, physical and digital. It is much more than just a statement, it is the actions behind the words. We embrace a continuous learning process to gain knowledge, skills, and understanding, to discern cultural differences in our own and other cultures. Now, this is incredibly important because these are the key ingredients to brave and psychologically safe spaces. You've probably heard psychologically safe spaces as a term that's come up repeatedly in the mainstream over the last 2 years. You just heard it in the presentation prior. What is it? Well, it means that we respect all points of view. We hold space for multiple perspectives and experiences and reflect and then demonstrate how these perspectives and experiences influence what we do and why we do it. What it really means is that we are maintaining a space where participants may be without fear of attack, ridicule, or denial of experience. And this begins one conversation, one activity at a time, one brave space at a time. Engagement is the centering of others. And to center others, we must first identify what a safe space is for the type of engagement we want. Because how one defines safety and safe space differs from participant to participant. So when engaging any group of participants, it's important to first understand and gauge their readiness to have these types of conversations, to develop shared meaning, identify common ground, and be in community with each other. It means we have to design for dissension, where we're holding space for lived experiences. We're allowing for all participants to share their ideas and stories. One thing you can do is send engagement questions in advance or allow ample time for people to reflect before they share and engage with others. Praise participants for alternate viewpoints. Request that people actively engage in the discussion of opposing viewpoints. Ensure that disrespectful comments are not accepted and that any agreed upon inclusive conversation and community guidelines are upheld. It means that we understand that we have to look closely at the power dynamics that shape and influence our conversation and communities. It means we need to be able to talk openly about how we're going to discuss difficult topics and where we might stumble along our journey. Acknowledging and understanding our fears is an all-important step in engaging in inclusive conversations. We are building trust through each and every interaction by addressing our own biases and making room for our voices, other voices, to be heard. We're developing those empathy skills. And this means we have to consider inclusive conversations and community as being part of or made up of regenerative practices. How might we become more curious about our digital behaviors and prejudices and respond compassionately? How are we building forgiveness, grace into our governance practices and modeling what healthy conflict and tension mean? It's only when these conditions, only when these elements are in place that people begin to feel a sense of belonging, where people feel secure, supported, accepted, and included, where a person feels appreciated for their uniqueness. Now, what my scholarship has shown is that we need to work harder at being human on digital. Our work with these museums is changing the shape of museum studies curriculum by rethinking, reframing, and reimagining processes with people at its center. When we seek to improve the employee experience, our collective courage, confidence, and awareness impacts the audience, the visitor, and the user experience. What's important to remember is that inclusive conversations and community take time. Rapport, trust, quality feedback, and actions require a thoughtful and considered approach to engagement. We must listen first. We must listen throughout. Do not rush this process. Pause and reflect on what already exists and how this work is connected to what came before and what comes after. To make space for innovative and inclusive conversations, the conditions for diversity and belonging must be designed into the new ways of communicating and working. How might we use this opportunity to go back to our organization's origins and rediscover and reimagine how our people grow together? How might we begin to infuse our way of working with regenerative practices so that way we might evolve to fulfill potential in a world that is constantly changing? Listen to what your participants and community need and want and act accordingly. Inclusive conversations and community require frequent reflection and course correction. I'll now hand it over to my colleagues, Sophie and Russ.
Thank you so much, Lauren. It was really fascinating to hear you talk about so many things that really are about being human, aren't they? And our needs and our desires and our wants and everything that we're looking for to sort of feel part of something with other people. So thank you so much. Lauren's going to stay with us because we are at some point going to look at some questions that have been coming up in the chat function. But for now, I'm going to hand straight over to Sophie. So Sophie, introduce yourself and let's kind of hear from your perspective some of the things that you're finding through your 1x1 project with Ross and Lauren.
Oh, okay. Oh, thanks very much, Marie, and thanks, Lauren, for kicking us off. So hi, everyone. I'm Sophie Frost. I'm also a research associate on 1x1. I take a slightly different approach to Lauren, and my focus is particularly on kind of the working practices within museums specifically, but I'm also very interested in working practices within the cultural sector more generally and arts organisations like this one. And what digital technology and changes in digital technology mean for working behaviours, working experiences, lived experiences of work. And we're finding, obviously, since the pandemic, a lot of stuff's escalated. It was already happening. You know, digital technology has been having huge, prolific, far-reaching impacts on the way we work and the way we experience doing cultural work. But it's sort of really, obviously, fast-forwarded a little bit in the last 2 years or so.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not, I think that's an interesting observation, that it's not anything new, but because of COVID, I think it really sort of accelerated the necessity of us at least testing these things out. And I think we're now reflecting on that fast-paced learning period to kind of go, well, actually, what did work and what didn't, and who's still left out, actually, and what extra considerations do we need to take forward now as we kind of more consciously build these spaces?
Yeah, I like that you went there, because something I'm finding a lot is I've got certain keywords I've been sort of experimenting with that I think typify what working practices look like in museums and cultural organisations at the moment. as a result of this pivot to digital. But one thing I'm really keen all the time now for us not to forget is that digital poverty and the digital divide has never been like more observable.
Yes.
And we're still trying to work out what that means to how we're doing digital engagement work, which I'm sure is something that you think about a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to kind of delve into some of those keywords a little bit. So we're fine, you know, I think what I found from research I did last year, a lot of ethnographic work, kind of taking the temperature of experiences of technology in cultural work, and words that came up with things like the increased amount of emotional labour that's involved. I can define any of these words a bit further if you're interested. Increased amounts of precarity, increased issues around cultural identity and how that's kind of in the mix with the interface with technology and cultural work, and then also really positive words, you know, like courage and agency, and Lauren mentioned confidence as well alongside courage, and empathy too. So I like to think these words that sort of typify some of the key characteristics of museum and cultural work now as a result of this pivot to digital are also foregrounding the future of work more generally, and I mean that across the spectrum. So yeah, really interesting. So I do want to hear more about that emotional labour actually, because what do you mean by that actually, and what's the repercussions of that, do you think? Well, it's a term that's been knocking around within the sociology of work for a while now, since the 80s, and it was first written about by someone called Ali Rothschild, and she actually wrote about it in relation to flight attendants, and she did a big study of Delta Airlines, and she talked about the managed heart and how flight attendants very much had to sort of adopt a very certain persona and a certain set of emotions in order to keep their clients, their customers happy. So she started it, but I think it's morphed, as all great ideas have. And I feel now anyone who's involved in change within their workplace, whether that's change to improve and increase opportunities for inclusion and diversity, changes in technology and innovation, all of those kind of roles require emotional labour. And by that I mean people who are really good at bridging people. They're very intuitive, they're quite analytical, they're quite good at getting on with everyone, they're quite good at taking people with them on a journey, explaining things in very straightforward ways. And I think the issue at the moment is we still don't value emotional labour very much within job specs, for example. So it's very much hidden work, it's invisible work that often doesn't have a monetary value attached to it, and that's a problem. So that's, I think, more or less what I mean by it. That's really interesting. So, for example, a really obvious group of people that sprung to mind, especially considering recent events, is the NHS. People, staff within the NHS, for example, but maybe not just the people involved in that sort of first sort of port of call, or being that patient first sort of person. What about all the people who are there behind the scenes trying to manage that huge shifting operations and new procedures and things like that? That's a group of people that first came to mind for me when you said that. And also I just wanted to take the opportunity to link into, so I'm part of a network of professionals who work in higher education institutions to essentially do a very small thing, so just change the culture of how universities work in the UK. But obviously, what we're often trying to do is be the advocates, be the leaders, be the project managers, be the facilitators, and there is a lot of emotional work involved in that, because I think there is it takes a lot of energy, I think, to really care. And I know that links in with maybe some other things that happen actually within museum study. So Russ, should we come to you and get your take on what we're talking about here, and maybe just some specific things that you've noticed through your 1x1 project?
Thanks, Maria, and thanks, Sophie. It's always just a privilege whenever we have a chance to hear you talk about your work, because you're right at the edge, not just in the ideas that you're coming up with, but the way you're doing this work. It's action research, so you're embedded thoughtfully and sensitively within the institution. So I know there's a certain amount of emotional labour that you're carrying as a humanities researcher as well, and that's something we talk a lot about as well on the project. It crept up on us, all of this. We knew that people, and we knew that emotion was such an important part of the way that museums provide and present to all their communities and all their audiences and visitors and users and so on. But the last year, it's as if we've become hypersensitized. It's as if we started to notice our experience within the workforce. And certainly with the museums we were working with. So we were working with the V&A, we were working with the Science Museum, we were working with I'm Good for Cymru, National Museum Wales, we were working with National Museum Scotland, but then we were working with 4 museums in the US, the National Air and Space Museum and the Smithsonian American Art Museum, the Cooper Hewitt Museum in New York, and then the American Women's History Initiative. And when we started the project with all of those incredible leaders of digital in those 8 institutions in the spring of last year, we thought this would be not a straightforward project, but we thought this would be a very exciting action research project where we would be understanding the everyday experience of developing digital within a museum. Little did we know, within a few weeks of our project starting, that, well, as our first film showed, the Children Need video, everything stopped, everything just turned on its head, and we had that white screen moment as well for us. And suddenly we were putting in place mentoring between our 2 museums in the UK and the US, but it was doing so much more. It was carrying so much more. And Sophie, your podcast, that the way you research, where you reflect and share your ideas through your podcast episodes as they go on. Some of those were tough listens because you were capturing the voices of those practitioners speaking about how hard it was. They were at the kitchen table at home recording something on their phone, and it was so clear to us that something we should have noticed all along, that delivering digital in a museum and gallery setting or in a cultural heritage setting, yes, it's going to be about getting the technology to work and the cables to work. And yes, it's going to be about being able to write a good policy and a good strategy and understanding the protocols. But it's people who do it. It's people who lead that change, design that digital, look after the users, think about where it could go next. So what One by One has shown us in the last year and a half is that, yes, it's about technology, and that's interesting, isn't it? The scientists are always going to help us to know how to build the technology and the hardware. Yes, it's about the policy and the business and the management, and our social scientists will help us to understand that critically. But it's also about the people involved. There is an affective, emotional dimension to designing digital, and it's going to be humanities research that's going to help us to understand that. That's what we can contribute to this in a scholarly way.
So what about now taking a moment? So we've got about 10 minutes left for our event. Sadly, it's gone so quickly. But shall we take a moment sort of thinking about what the future looks like? So we've heard people as part of this event today talk about this idea of blended approaches. And I don't know about you, but certainly among my professional colleagues, for example, very quickly the words blended approach came out of people's mouths around this idea of acknowledging that online engagement has absolutely opened up access and reach. And this idea of kind of having sort of reusable content that can reach more people. However, we also firmly acknowledge that it does not completely replace face-to-face interactions. And actually there are still, as you've mentioned, Sophie, very importantly, people who we need to be aware of that are still left out of these spaces and these opportunities. So what does the future look like around this idea of a blended approach maybe, or how sort of digital environments are going to sort of start to take shape in the future?
Well, I can jump in just to start off with. I think hybridity is the word, isn't it, that we're hearing so much about now, and this sense that, well, we've just come back. Sophie you were presenting your work at the the National Museums Association conference last week, and there were 400 people there in Liverpool, for that important event where key research and key thinkers are there presenting their work. But there were another 1,000 people online. And when our colleagues from the Anacostia Museum, when Melanie, the director of the Anacostia, was presenting, Elaine Human-Gurian was in an island in the Caribbean, whilst another panelist was in the room, whilst the chair was somewhere else, and so on and so on. And questions were coming in from the room, but were also coming in from around the world. And it showed us the power of that hybridity, of being able to do an event that's both online and physical at the same time. what we now need to work out, and what Attenborough Arts does so brilliantly, and I think what the work, Angela's work, but also, the work of your youth programme going forward has shown us in the last 6 years and going forward, is we need to ensure that as we get excited by hybridity, and we get excited by blend, and we get excited by what's possible when things are happening in so many different channels simultaneously, that is inclusive. And that means making sure that everybody is comfortable with that environment. That the codes, the barriers, the ways that those interfaces, those pieces of hardware, but those kind of cultural interactions can be quite excluding. But equally, thinking about, and I'm someone I'm a visually impaired person, and I have to learn now a new set of interfaces to interact with in my teaching, in my research, and in my everyday life. So as we get excited by the potential of hybridity, it's beholden on us. Actually, no, it's non-negotiable that we have to think about how all of that will be designed and framed in an inclusive and accessible way.
Thank you. Sophie, anything to add to that?
Well, it's hard to add lots to that because that was great. I think a couple of things, two different things. One is I hugely believe in the democratizing force of technology. And I sort of think that's kind of linked with what you were just saying. But I think always through the ages, through the centuries, with the advent of every new bit of innovation and like key bit of kit, it's and I'm thinking about Walter Benjamin here and kind of the opportunities of mass reproduction and how exciting that was when photography was invented. And I feel the same. I think we can't lose sight of the fact that there is so much potential in the future if people have access to equipment, but also if we meet them where they are. And I'm quite big on this idea of digital courage, and it really is the fact that there's not a one-size-fits-all approach to technology. We should have agency, creative agency, which I think was mentioned in the first video as well. To some tools, some technologies aren't going to feel right for us, and I think we should feel, from an ethical viewpoint, comfortable with saying, yeah, I don't really like Facebook, but I really love Instagram, or I don't really like my smartphone, but I really want to use a tech watch or whatever it is. And I think we have to really embrace the idea of choice more than ever with how we use technology, especially with big tech. And I also think we should just really embrace the idea that this is a way of really flattening down hierarchies. This is what I think digital can offer. And final thing on that, I just think in the world of work, any work, not just cultural work, we just need to get a lot better at valuing digital labour and all the hidden types of labour that's involved, that mundane, ceaseless data entry, all of that stuff, it's hidden labour. I think we need to get a bit better at valuing that because it is the future, I think.
Absolutely. And just to kind of add to that, something that was mentioned earlier, I think we need to absolutely get so much better at valuing all of those skills and expertise that's required to provide high quality, caring environments for people to sort of truly, genuinely contribute to something. So we've got a couple of minutes left. I just wanted to take a moment to sort of pull up some questions that we've had from our chat, and something that's come up is from Mark. So much of the language around inclusion through safe collaborative spaces is connected with donation, bounty, gifting, these spaces with an expectation of creative use. How do we make inclusion sound a little less lordy? So yeah, and maybe just more organic. So what do you think?
Ross, do you want to give that one a shot?
Yeah, it's being inclusive, being designing things in a universal way isn't about being benevolent. It's not by graciously deciding to make something accessible. That was a very different model of accessibility and disability that, thankfully isn't part of many of our worlds now. It's a right to have access to culture and to education and to the arts. It's enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and it is non-negotiable. This is enshrined in the ethics of the museums, that we work with and that we're here. It's enshrined within the ethical codes of universities as well. So I think I certainly agree with Mark's point that we have to be mindful of the vocabulary that we're using to describe inclusion and accessibility. And for me, I find myself typically just reaching for words around, justice and rights and things being equitable and, to be honest, fair. And actually, when we start just describing these resources and this design process in those terms, it seems to just quieten things. It just becomes so clear. It's just about being fair to everyone and not making this benevolent, kind of generous opportunity that I will also make things accessible to you as well. Please, we are so beyond, we hope that. What's going through your mind, Sophie?
Difficult. I like this term, lordly.
That
Mark
lordly,
I mean, I wonder whether there's going to be a degree of benevolence until it just becomes a lot more mainstream. It's something we can't get. There'll be a tipping point, and maybe we're just not quite there yet. So, I know that's not a, probably terribly political answer. I was also thinking about the deficit model and how that's what we're in danger of here. And I'm really aware of that.
Sorry, for those who don't know, what is the deficit model?
Well, so I'm going to butcher this a bit, but as far as I understand it, it came up, it was first originated by Amartya Sen, who's an international development scholar, very prolific, and he came up with an idea of it now. It's been taken on by King's researchers as the cultural deficit model, and it's again that very much idea of like the benevolent dictator who says, you must, we must enable everyone to have access. It's a very much us and them, we have to bequeath something. And it's assuming then that people have a lack.
Yes.
Maybe, and that's not right. And I think that's the danger when we have these kind of inclusion debates as well, that there is an implicit lack. And I think the only way around that, to be honest, is by being extremely vulnerable and extremely honest when we have these conversations, and constantly coming from a viewpoint of, I need to learn more about this. I don't necessarily know how to speak your language, or whoever you're talking to. And I think we're still not very good at that. So
that's really interesting. So maybe something that we can use just to kind of wrap this up is this idea that we're thinking very consciously now about being human in digital spaces, but maybe actually we could all be a bit more human in our physical spaces and just our conversations and how we interact with each other more broadly. I think this idea of a professionalism that means you're completely without any sort of empathy and emotion and humanity hopefully is way in the past, and I think we can all maybe embrace our humanity in all of our spaces and not be afraid to kind of just be a bit clearer about what we want and what we need in order to sort of be fully enabled to be part of something. So thank you all so much. I've had a blast. I think we've all had great fun doing this event as part of the Being Human Festival. I hope you've all enjoyed listening in and learning about some of the fantastic work that's going on in this space, and enjoy the rest of the festival. We'll speak to you again soon, hopefully.